The evening sun was just starting to set when Lieutenant Commander Maya Richardson pulled out of the gym parking lot. She was tired but felt good after her workout. It was one of those rare, peaceful moments when she wasn't wearing her uniform or thinking about work. Just a regular woman driving home in her comfortable clothes, listening to some old school music on the radio. Maya lived about 20 minutes away from the gym, and the drive took her through a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and nice houses. She'd driven this route hundreds of times before. Nothing ever happened here. It was the kind of place where people jogged with their dogs and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. But today was different. She noticed the police car behind her at the traffic light. Not unusual. Police cars were everywhere in the city. Maya didn't think much of it at first. The light turned green and she continued driving, staying right at the speed limit like she always did. Years of training had made her a careful driver. Then she saw the flashing lights. Maya's heart sank a little, but she kept her cool. She'd been through this before, more times than she cared to remember. Being a black woman driving through certain neighborhoods sometimes meant getting stopped for no real reason. It was frustrating, but she knew how to handle it. Stay calm, be polite. Don't give them any excuse. She pulled over to the side of the road, turned off her engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. This was the routine she'd learned long ago. Make sure they can see your hands. Don't make sudden movements. Be cooperative, but know your rights. 2 officers got out of the patrol car. Maya could see them in her side mirror, walking toward her with that confident stride that police officers have. She rolled down her window and waited. The first officer who came to her window was tall with short brown hair and a look on his face like he'd already decided something about her. His name tag read Sutton. The second officer, whose tag said Cole, stood a few steps back, hand resting near his belt. License and registration. Officer Sutton said, "Not good evening, or do you know why I stopped you?" "Just a demand, flat and cold." "May I ask why you pulled me over, officer?" Maya asked politely. She kept her voice steady and respectful. "Just give me your license and registration," Sutton repeated, his tone getting harder. Maya took a slow breath. "Of course. I'm reaching for my glove compartment now to get my registration." She announced every move, keeping everything visible and slow. This was survival. This was what black parents taught their children. This was what she'd had to learn despite spending her entire career in law enforcement. She handed over her documents through the window. Officer Sutton barely looked at them before turning to his partner. "Have her step out of the vehicle." "Why?" "What's the problem?" Maya asked, still keeping her voice level. "Just step out of the car, ma'am," Officer Cole said, moving closer. There was something in his voice, something that made Maya's skin prickle. She recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone who'd already made up their mind about who she was. Maya complied. She opened her door slowly and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The evening air felt cooler now. Or maybe it was just the situation making her feel exposed. "Is there a problem with my driving?" she asked again. "I wasn't speeding. My car is registered and insured." Officer Sutton walked around her car, looking at it like he was inspecting something suspicious. "Your taillight is broken," he said. Maya knew that wasn't true. She'd just had her car serviced last week. Everything was working fine. But she also knew that arguing about it right now wouldn't help. These stops were never really about taillights or turn signals. They were about something else entirely. "I wasn't aware of that," she said calmly. "I'll get it fixed right away." Officer Cole was now looking through her car windows, peering into the back seat. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "The gym," Maya answered. "Which gym?" "Fitness World on Patterson Avenue." "And where are you heading?" "Home." "Where's home?" Maya gave her address. It was in a nice part of town, not far from here. She saw the 2 officers exchange a look. It was quick, but she caught it. That look said everything. That look said they didn't believe a black woman could afford to live in that neighborhood. That look said they thought she was lying or didn't belong. Officer Sutton crossed his arms. "That's a pretty nice area. What do you do for a living?" Maya felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She'd been a police officer for 15 years. She'd worked her way up through the ranks. She'd earned every promotion, every commendation, every bit of respect from the people who actually knew her. But right now, standing on this sidewalk with these 2 officers looking at her like she was a criminal, none of that mattered. "I work for the city," she said simply. It was true, but she didn't elaborate. Something inside her wanted to see how far this would go. She wanted to see if these officers would do the right thing, treat her with basic respect, follow proper procedure, or if they would keep going down this path. Working for the city pays that well, huh? Officer Cole said with a smirk. There was no mistaking the tone now. It was pure disrespect. Maya didn't respond. She just stood there, hands by her sides, maintaining eye contact. She'd learned a long time ago that silence could be powerful. Let them talk. Let them show who they really were. Officer Sutton went back to his patrol car, supposedly to run her license. But Maya noticed he was taking his time. This was another tactic she recognized. Make her wait. Make her uncomfortable. Remind her that they had the power here. She stood on the sidewalk for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes. Cars drove past, and she wondered if anyone noticed. Did they see a woman being harassed, or did they just see a routine traffic stop? Would anyone stop to help if things went wrong? The sun was lower now, and the shadows were getting longer. Maya's phone was in her pocket. Slowly, carefully, she reached for it. What are you doing? Officer Cole barked, suddenly alert. I'm getting my phone, Maya said clearly. I'm going to record this interaction. That's my right. Put the phone away, Cole demanded. No, officer. I'm allowed to record. I'm not interfering with your duties. I'm just documenting this stop. She saw his jaw tighten, but he didn't move to stop her. He knew she was right. Citizens had the right to record police interactions in public. It was settled law. Maya held up her phone and started recording. She made sure to get both officers in the frame, along with her car and the surroundings. This wasn't her first time doing this. She'd seen too many situations go wrong, too many people's stories dismissed because there was no evidence. Officer Sutton came back from the patrol car, and his expression changed when he saw the phone. Recording us isn't going to help you, he said. I'm just protecting myself, Maya replied. Standard procedure. Something flickered in Sutton's eyes when she said that. Standard procedure, he repeated slowly. You seem to know a lot about procedure. Maya didn't answer. She just kept the camera rolling and waited to see what would happen next. Officer Sutton stared at the phone in Maya's hand like it was some kind of weapon. His whole attitude shifted. Before he'd been dismissive and cold. Now he seemed annoyed, maybe even a little nervous. Good, Maya thought. Let him be uncomfortable for once. So what's the verdict, officer? Maya asked, keeping her voice steady. Am I free to go? Sutton looked at her license again, taking his time. This address on here, this is really where you live? Yes, it is. How long have you lived there? Maya felt her patience wearing thin, but she answered anyway. 3 years. And you said you work for the city? Officer Cole chimed in, circling around to stand next to his partner. They were both facing her now, like they were interrogating a suspect instead of handling a simple traffic stop. That's correct. Doing what exactly? Sutton pressed. Administrative work, Maya said. It wasn't a lie. Being in charge of internal affairs involved a lot of paperwork and administrative duties. But she still wasn't ready to tell them who she really was. She wanted to see how bad this would get. Cole laughed, actually laughed. Administrative work, right? And that pays enough for a house in that neighborhood? I manage my money well, Maya said flatly. I bet you do, Cole said with a tone that made her skin crawl. There was an implication there, an ugly suggestion that she couldn't have earned her home honestly. Maya had heard these kinds of insinuations before. The assumption that a black woman with nice things must have gotten them through some illegitimate means. She took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help. Showing emotion would just give them ammunition. They wanted her to lose her cool to give them a reason to escalate this further. Officers, I've cooperated fully. I've shown you my license and registration. Everything is in order. If you're going to cite me for the taillight, please do so, and let me be on my way. Sutton folded his arms across his chest. We're not done here yet. What else do you need? Maya asked. I need to verify some things. This vehicle, you said it's yours. Yes, it's registered in my name. You have my registration right there. Registration can be faked, Cole said. Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here she was, a high-ranking police officer being accused of driving a stolen car in broad daylight. Her car wasn't even expensive. It was a reliable sedan, nothing fancy, but apparently even that was too much for these officers to believe she could own. Feel free to run the plates, Maya said. You'll see everything is legitimate. Sutton did just that, walking back to his patrol car again. Maya stood there, still recording, still waiting. The sun was almost down now, and the streetlights were starting to come on. She wondered how long they were going to drag this out. A couple walking their dog passed by on the other side of the street. They looked over at the scene, the police car with its lights still flashing, Maya standing on the sidewalk with her phone up. The woman whispered something to her husband, and they both quickly looked away and kept walking. Nobody wants to get involved, Maya thought. Nobody wants to be the one who speaks up. She understood it, but it still hurt. How many times had people seen situations like this and just walked away? How many people had been harassed or worse because nobody wanted to intervene? Officer Cole stayed with her, standing too close, invading her personal space in a way that felt deliberately threatening. "So administrative work," he said again. "Must be nice working a cushy office job." Maya didn't respond. She wasn't going to engage with his baiting. "I'm talking to you," Cole said, his voice getting harder. "And I'm choosing not to respond to irrelevant questions," Maya said calmly. "Am I required to make small talk with you, officer?" His face flushed red. "You've got an attitude problem, you know that?" There it was. The accusation she'd been waiting for. Attitude problem was code, and every black woman knew it. It meant you weren't being submissive enough. It meant you had the audacity to assert your rights, to speak up for yourself, to not accept whatever treatment they wanted to dish out. "I'm being completely respectful," Maya said clearly, making sure her phone caught every word. "I've answered your questions. I've provided my documentation. I haven't raised my voice or been confrontational in any way." "You're being confrontational right now," Cole shot back. Maya took another deep breath. This was the game they played. Twist your words. Make your calm responses seem aggressive. Turn your reasonable questions into disrespect. She'd seen it happen to countless people during her career. She'd even stopped officers from doing it when she could, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It made her blood boil. Sutton came back, and his expression was frustrated. Everything had clearly checked out. Her license was valid. Her registration was current. The car wasn't stolen. There was nothing wrong except the fictional broken taillight that they'd used as an excuse to pull her over. "Everything checks out?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Sutton didn't want to admit it, but he nodded stiffly. "Looks like it. So am I free to go?" "Not yet. I still need to check something." "What else could you possibly need to check?" Maya felt her frustration finally starting to show. She'd been standing here for over 20 minutes now. This was beyond a routine stop. This was harassment, plain and simple. "Don't get smart with me," Sutton warned. "I'm not getting smart. I'm asking a legitimate question. You've verified my identity, my license, my registration, and my vehicle. What other reason do you have to detain me?" "I can detain you for as long as I need to complete my investigation," Sutton said. "Investigation into what? A broken taillight that probably isn't even broken? This isn't an investigation. This is profiling." The words hung in the air between them. Cole's hand went to his belt again, and Maya saw Sutton's expression harden. She'd said the quiet part out loud, and they didn't like it. "You're accusing us of racial profiling?" Sutton said slowly, his voice dangerous. Maya looked directly into his eyes. "I'm saying this stop has gone on much longer than necessary for a minor equipment violation. I'm saying you've questioned my right to own my own vehicle and live in my own home. I'm saying you've found no violations, yet you continue to detain me. So yes, I'm questioning what this is really about." For a moment, she thought Sutton might actually escalate things physically. She saw his jaw working, saw the anger in his eyes, but he seemed to remember the phone still recording, and he took a step back. "You want to file a complaint?" he asked with a smirk that said he already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "Yes, actually, I do. May I have your badge numbers, please?" Both officers laughed. Actually laughed. Cole shook his head like she'd just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Go ahead and file your complaint," Sutton said. "You know where those go? Nowhere. They get reviewed by people who understand that we have a difficult job out here. They get filed away and forgotten." "I'll take my chances," Maya said. "Badge numbers, please." "You can see them on our uniforms," Cole said dismissively. Maya zoomed in with her phone camera, making sure she got clear shots of both their badge numbers and name tags. She also made sure to get the number on their patrol car. "Anything else you need for your little complaint?" Sutton asked mockingly. "Just one more thing," Maya said. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." "Our supervisor is busy, then I'll wait." "No, you won't. We're going to let you go with a warning." "Get your taillight fixed," Sutton said, handing back her license and registration. a warning for something that might not even be broken. How generous, Maya said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of her voice entirely. You should be grateful we're being nice about this, Cole added. Some people in your position would be leaving here in handcuffs. The threat was clear. The message was received. They were letting her know that they had the power to make her life much worse, and she should just accept what happened and move on. But Maya wasn't going to move on. She was going to remember every detail of this stop. Maya stood there on the sidewalk, her phone still recording, looking at these two officers who clearly thought they'd won something. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no clue that the woman they'd just harassed was someone who could actually do something about their behavior. But Maya still wasn't ready to reveal that card. Not yet. She wanted to see this through, to experience the whole process that regular citizens went through when they tried to report police misconduct. She'd reviewed countless complaints in her role, read hundreds of reports from people claiming they'd been mistreated. Now she was living it, and it was even worse than she'd imagined. So you're refusing to call your supervisor? Maya asked one more time, making sure it was on camera. We're not refusing anything, Sutton said with fake politeness. Our supervisor is handling other matters, but you're free to file your complaint through the proper channels. There's a website. There's a phone number. You can even come down to the station in person. I'm familiar with the process, Maya said quietly. I'm sure you are, Cole muttered under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. The implication was clear. They thought she was one of those people who filed complaints all the time, who caused trouble, who couldn't just accept how things were. If only they knew. Am I free to go now? Maya asked. Yes, ma'am. You're free to go. Just get that taillight fixed, Sutton said, turning away like the whole thing had been a minor inconvenience to his evening. Maya got back in her car, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. She was angry, hurt, frustrated, and tired. All she'd wanted was to go home after a workout. Instead, she'd been stopped, questioned, doubted, mocked, and threatened. And this was her own department. These were officers she technically outranked. These were men who should have known better. She pulled away slowly, checking her mirrors. The patrol car stayed where it was, the officers standing beside it, probably congratulating themselves on handling another suspicious person. Maya drove for a few blocks before pulling into a parking lot to collect herself. Her phone was full of video evidence, clear footage of everything that had happened. Their faces, their badge numbers, their words. Everything she'd need to file a formal complaint. But first she needed to get home and think about how to handle this. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to know that filing a complaint against fellow officers was complicated. Even with video evidence, even with clear violations of procedure, these things had a way of getting buried or explained away. Officers protected their own. That's just how it was. When Maya finally got home, she sat in her driveway for a long moment before going inside. The house she'd worked so hard to buy, the home she'd earned through years of dedication and sacrifice, suddenly felt like evidence in a crime. The fact that she could afford it had been used against her, turned into something suspicious. Inside, she poured herself a glass of water and sat at her kitchen table. She opened her laptop and navigated to the department's internal complaint system. She'd helped design parts of this system, had pushed for it to be more accessible to the public. Now she was going to use it herself, but not as a lieutenant commander. She was going to file this as a regular citizen, using her personal email instead of her work one. She typed out every detail: the time of the stop, the location, the officers' names and badge numbers, every question they'd asked, every implication they'd made, every moment they'd treated her like a criminal instead of a citizen with rights. She attached the video file, making sure it uploaded properly. Before she hit submit, she paused. Once she filed this, things would start moving. The complaint would be reviewed by the very department she worked for. It would probably land on her own desk, given her position in internal affairs. But the officers didn't know that yet. They thought they were dealing with just another civilian who they could intimidate into silence. Maya hit submit. The confirmation message popped up on her screen. Your complaint has been received and will be reviewed within 10 business days. You will receive a case number and updates via email. Thank you for helping us maintain accountability in our department. She'd written that message herself last year, trying to make the process feel more welcoming and transparent. Now she was on the other side of it, and those 10 business days felt like an eternity. The next morning, Maya went to work early. She drove her same car, the one with the supposedly broken taillight. Before she left home, she'd checked it thoroughly. Both taillights worked perfectly. No cracks, no damage, nothing that would justify a stop. She'd known it all along, but now she had photo evidence too. At the station, she walked through the halls in her uniform, the bars on her shoulders marking her rank. Other officers nodded respectfully as she passed. Some of them she'd trained. Some she'd disciplined. Some she'd promoted. They all knew her as a fair but firm leader who didn't tolerate misconduct. If only Sutton and Cole could see her now. She got to her office and checked the complaint system. Sure enough, there was the report she'd filed last night. It had been automatically assigned a case number and was sitting in the queue, waiting to be reviewed. Protocol said it would be assigned to an investigator within 48 hours. Maya could assign it to herself right now. She could pull rank, reveal who she was, and have those 2 officers in her office by the end of the day. But something held her back. She wanted to see how the system would handle it naturally. Would the complaint be taken seriously? Would anyone care that 2 officers had clearly violated protocol during a traffic stop? Or would it get the same treatment that so many other complaints received, reviewed briefly and dismissed with a finding of no misconduct? She decided to wait. She'd give it a few days, see what happened. If the investigation was handled properly, great. If not, well, then she'd have even more evidence of the problems in her department. Her partner in internal affairs, Lieutenant Anderson, knocked on her door around mid-morning. He was a good cop, someone Maya trusted, one of the few people in the department she could be completely honest with. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, noticing something off in her expression. "You seem stressed." Maya considered telling him everything right then. Anderson would be outraged on her behalf. He'd want to take action immediately. But she just shook her head. "Long night. I'm fine." "If you're sure," he said, not entirely convinced. "Hey, we got a new complaint that came in last night. Traffic stop gone wrong, supposedly. Want me to grab it?" Maya's heart jumped. "Let me see it." Anderson pulled it up on his tablet and showed her. It was her complaint, stripped of identifying information at this stage of the review. Just a summary. The officers' names and the allegation of racial profiling and procedural violations. "Looks pretty detailed," Anderson said. "There's even video attached." "That's rare. Most people don't think to record." Maya said, pretending to read it for the first time. "Assign it to yourself. I want this one handled carefully." "You know these officers?" Anderson asked. "Not well, but I've seen them around. Sutton and Cole." "Yeah, I know them. They work evening patrol in the North District. Haven't heard much about them, good or bad." That was interesting. No history of complaints, or at least none that had been taken seriously, but Maya knew that didn't mean they'd never done this before. It just meant they'd never been caught, or the people they'd harassed hadn't bothered to report it. "Do it by the book," Maya said. "Full investigation. Interview witnesses if there are any. Pull their body cam footage." "They didn't mention body cams in the report," Anderson said, scrolling through. "That's because they probably turned them off," Maya said, unable to keep the bitterness out of her voice. Anderson looked at her sharply. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm fine. Just tired of seeing the same problems over and over. We train these officers. We give them clear guidelines, and some of them still think they can do whatever they want out there." "I hear you," Anderson said. "I'll handle this one personally. If there's misconduct here, I'll find it." Maya nodded, trusting that he would. Anderson was thorough and fair. He didn't let officers off the hook just because they wore a badge. What Maya didn't include in her written complaint was what happened in those final minutes of the traffic stop, right before Sutton and Cole let her go. She'd been so focused on documenting the main interaction that she'd almost forgotten about it. But now, sitting in her office, the memory came flooding back. Just as the 2 officers were about to let her leave, another patrol car had pulled up. Maya had felt her stomach drop when she saw it. One more officer meant one more person who could escalate the situation. One more person who might not like her recording. One more variable in an already tense encounter. The 3rd officer who got out was a sergeant. Maya had recognized the stripes on his uniform even in the fading light. His name tag read Walsh, and he walked over with the kind of confidence that came from rank. Sergeants were supposed to be supervisors, the ones who kept regular officers in check. For a brief moment, Maya had felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be the person who would see what was happening and put a stop to it. That hope died quickly. "What do we have here?" Sergeant Walsh had asked, looking at Sutton and Cole first, then at Maya. His eyes had lingered on her, taking in her appearance, her car, the phone still in her hand. "Traffic stop. Sergeant broken taillight," Sutton had said, his voice taking on a more professional tone in front of his supervisor. "Just finishing up." Walsh had nodded, then turned to Maya. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" The way he'd asked it, Maya knew he wasn't really interested in her answer. It was a formality, something he had to say because she was recording. His tone made it clear whose side he was already on. "Officers Sutton and Cole pulled me over for an alleged equipment violation," Maya had said carefully. "They've been questioning me for over half an hour about where I live and where I work. I've provided all my documentation, everything is checked out, and yet they've continued to detain me." Walsh had looked at the two officers. "That true?" "We were just being thorough, Sarge," Cole had said with a shrug. "You know how it is in this neighborhood. We've had some issues." "What kind of issues?" Maya had asked, knowing full well what he was implying. "Break-ins, car thefts, people who don't belong here causing trouble," Walsh had said, looking right at her when he said, "people who don't belong." And there it was, the real reason for the stop. Not a broken taillight, not anything she'd done wrong, just the fact that she was a black woman driving through a neighborhood that people like Walsh thought should be reserved for others. "I have every right to be here," Maya had said, her voice firm but controlled. "I'm not breaking any laws. I haven't committed any crimes. And I'd like to go home now." Walsh had crossed his arms, studying her. "You seem pretty knowledgeable about your rights. You a lawyer or something?" "I work for the city." Maya had repeated the same line she'd given the other officers. "Doing what?" "That's not relevant to this traffic stop." Walsh had smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Just curious. Not every day we stop someone who knows all about procedure and rights. Makes me wonder what experience you have with police." The implication hung in the air. He was suggesting she had a criminal record, that she'd been stopped before because she'd done something wrong. It was character assassination disguised as casual conversation, and Maya had felt her anger rising again. "I'm a law-abiding citizen," she'd said clearly, "and I'd like to know why I'm still being detained when no violations have been found." "Nobody's detaining you," Walsh had said smoothly. "We're just having a conversation. A conversation I didn't initiate and don't wish to continue." Sutton and Cole had exchanged looks with Walsh, some kind of silent communication that Maya couldn't quite read. It was the kind of thing that came from working together, from being part of the same tribe. They all wore the same uniform. They all had each other's backs. And she was the outsider, the threat, the problem that needed to be handled. "Tell you what," Walsh had said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. "How about you take your warning about that taillight and head home? We'll forget about the attitude and you can go about your evening. Sound fair?" "The attitude," Maya had repeated slowly. "I haven't had any attitude. I've been nothing but cooperative and respectful." "If you say so," Walsh had said with that same fake smile. "But between you and me, you might want to work on how you talk to officers. We're out here trying to keep people safe, and we don't appreciate being treated like the enemy." Maya had wanted to say so much in that moment. She'd wanted to tell them that respect went both ways, that badges didn't give them the right to harass people, that they were the ones who needed to work on their attitudes. But she'd held her tongue, knowing that anything she said would just be used against her. Instead, she'd just looked at all three of them, making sure her phone camera caught their faces, their badge numbers, their comfortable alliance against her. Then she'd gotten in her car and driven away, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. Now, 2 days after filing the complaint, Maya sat in her office and thought about Sergeant Walsh. He'd been there at the end. He'd heard everything, and instead of correcting his officers, instead of ending the improper stop, he'd joined in. He'd added his own layer of intimidation and disrespect. She pulled up his file on her computer. Thomas Walsh, 15 years with the department. Multiple commendations. Good arrest record. No disciplinary actions. On paper, he looked like a model officer, but Maya knew that didn't mean much. Plenty of problematic officers had clean records because nobody ever reported them, or because the reports got buried. Walsh was a sergeant, which meant he had friends in higher places. He knew how the system worked. He knew how to cover his tracks. Maya added his name to a note in the complaint file. Anderson would need to interview him too, get his version of events. It would be interesting to see what he remembered, what he'd admit to, what excuses he'd make. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anderson. Reviewed the video from that complaint. This is bad. These officers need retraining at minimum. Body cam footage shows they had their cameras off most of the time, only turned them on at the very end. That's a policy violation right there. Maya texted back, keep digging. I want a complete picture. She went about her day, attending meetings, reviewing other cases, doing the administrative work that came with her rank. But her mind kept drifting back to that traffic stop, to the way those 3 officers had treated her. She thought about all the other people who'd experienced the same thing. People who didn't have her resources or knowledge. People who just had to accept it and move on. That evening, as she was preparing to leave for the day, she ran into Sergeant Walsh in the parking garage. He was getting into his personal vehicle, still in uniform. He saw her and did a double take, his eyes going wide for just a second before he composed himself. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice neutral but his body language tense. "Working late?" "Just finishing up," Maya said, watching him carefully. Did he recognize her from the traffic stop? It had been dark and she'd been in civilian clothes. Plus, he'd only been there for a few minutes at the end. But something in his expression suggested he was putting pieces together. "Everything okay?" Walsh asked, and there was a question beneath the question. He was fishing, trying to figure out if she knew something. "Fine, you?" Maya kept her voice professional, giving nothing away. "Good. Good. Just heading home." They stood there for a moment, an awkward silence stretching between them. Maya could see his mind working, see him trying to decide if he should say something else. But in the end, he just nodded and got in his car. Maya watched him drive away, a small smile on her face. He suspected something. Maybe he'd mentioned the stop to someone and word had gotten back to him that a complaint had been filed. Or maybe he'd just seen the news that Internal Affairs was investigating him and his officers. Either way, he was nervous, not good. He should be. 3 days after the traffic stop, Maya made a decision. She'd given the system enough time to work. Anderson had conducted preliminary interviews with Sutton and Cole, who'd both stuck to their story about a routine stop for an equipment violation. They claimed they'd been professional and courteous. They denied making any inappropriate comments. They said the stop had only taken 15 minutes, not the 40 that Maya had experienced. They were lying, and Maya had video proof. But they didn't know that yet. They thought they could just tell their version of events and it would be accepted without question, like it probably had been so many times before. Maya called Anderson into her office that morning. "The complaint we've been investigating. The traffic stop. I need to tell you something." Anderson sat down, his expression curious. "What's up?" "I'm the complainant." For a moment, Anderson just stared at her. Then his eyes went wide. "You're kidding. That was you? That was me. In civilian clothes, driving home from the gym. They pulled me over, harassed me for 40 minutes, questioned my right to own my car and live in my home, and then let me go with a warning about a taillight that isn't broken." Anderson let out a long breath. "Holy hell. Does anyone else know?" "Not yet. I wanted to see how the investigation would proceed naturally. I wanted to know if these officers would tell the truth or if they'd lie to cover their tracks. And they lied. They did." Anderson shook his head in disbelief. "What do you want to do? You could end their careers today. One word from you and they're done." Maya had thought about that. She had the power to fire them immediately, or at least suspend them pending a full disciplinary hearing. But she wanted something more than just punishment. She wanted them to understand what they'd done wrong. She wanted them to know that the woman they'd dismissed and disrespected was someone they should have treated with basic human dignity, badge or no badge. "I want to confront them," Maya said, "face to face. I want them to see who I am and realize what they did." "When?" "Today, this morning." "Can you get them here?" Anderson nodded slowly. "I'll tell them we need them to come in for a follow-up interview about the complaint. They won't know you'll be there." "What about Walsh?" "Him too. He's part of this." An hour later, Maya stood in one of the department's interview rooms waiting. Her heart was beating fast, not from nervousness but from anticipation. This was it. The moment when these 3 officers would realize their mistake. She heard voices in the hallway. Anderson's voice calm and professional. Then Sutton's voice sounding annoyed. I don't know why we have to keep going over this. We gave our statements. The stop was clean. Just a few more questions, Anderson said. Won't take long. The door opened and Sutton walked in first, followed by Cole and Walsh. They were all in uniform, looking confident and unconcerned. Just another day, just another complaint to brush off and forget about. Then they saw Maya. Sutton stopped so suddenly that Cole almost ran into him. All three officers froze, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition to horror in the span of about 3 seconds. No, Sutton said, his face going pale. No way. Maya stood there in her full uniform, the lieutenant commander bars on her shoulders clearly visible. She didn't say anything at first. She just let them look, let them understand. Cole's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You work for the city. You said, I do work for the city, Maya said calmly. I work for this police department. I'm Lieutenant Commander Maya Richardson. I'm head of internal affairs, and I'm the woman you three harassed during a traffic stop 3 days ago. Walsh actually took a step backward, his hand going to his forehead. Oh God. Have a seat, gentlemen, Maya said, gesturing to the chairs on the other side of the table. None of them moved. They were still processing, still trying to figure out how this had happened, how they'd managed to stop and harass their own commander. That's an order, Maya said, her voice hardening. They sat. All three of them looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Sutton's hands were shaking. Cole couldn't make eye contact. Walsh just stared at the table. Do you remember me now? Maya asked. Do you remember pulling over a black woman for a broken taillight that wasn't broken? Do you remember questioning where I lived and what I did for work? Do you remember implying that I couldn't possibly afford my own home through legitimate means? Sutton opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Let me refresh your memory, Maya said. She pulled out her phone and played the video. Her video, the one she'd recorded. The one that showed everything. They watched in silence as their own voices filled the room. Every dismissive comment, every inappropriate question, every moment of disrespect. The video didn't lie. It showed exactly what had happened. When it ended, the room was completely silent. Sutton finally managed to say, I didn't know. We didn't know who you were. Maya leaned forward. And would it have mattered? If I wasn't a lieutenant commander? If I was just a regular citizen, would that have made your behavior acceptable? No one answered. Let me tell you what you did wrong, Maya continued. You pulled me over without reasonable suspicion. The taillight excuse was fabricated. You then proceeded to detain me far beyond what was necessary for a simple equipment check. You asked inappropriate questions about my personal life, my home, and my employment. You made racially charged assumptions. You refused to call a supervisor when I requested one. Officer Sutton, Officer Cole, you turned off your body cameras, which is a direct violation of department policy. And Sergeant Walsh, you arrived on scene and instead of correcting your officer's behavior, you participated in it. Walsh found his voice, though it came out rough. Commander, I sincerely apologize. If you had known I was your superior officer, you would have behaved differently, Maya interrupted. But that's exactly the problem. You should treat every citizen with respect and professionalism, regardless of who they are or what they look like. The fact that you only regret your actions now that you know my rank tells me everything I need to know about your character. Cole was crying, actually crying, tears running down his face as the reality of the situation hit him. His career was probably over. All three of their careers were hanging by a thread. Sutton tried again. Commander Richardson, we made a terrible mistake. We let our assumptions cloud our judgment. We weren't following proper procedure. But please, you have to understand you didn't mean to get caught, Maya said flatly. That's what you didn't mean. How many times have you done this before? How many other people have you stopped and harassed? People who didn't have the resources to fight back or file complaints. People who didn't know their rights? None of them answered, but their silence was answer enough. I've reviewed your records, Maya continued. This complaint isn't the first one filed against you two. She looked at Sutton and Cole. There have been others. They were dismissed or marked as unfounded, but now I'm going back through all of them, and I'm reopening those investigations. You can't do that, Sutton said desperately. I absolutely can, and I will, because this isn't just about what you did to me. This is about a pattern of behavior that has been allowed to continue for far too long. Maya stood up. and all three officers instinctively stood as well, trained to show respect to superior officers even in the worst moments of their careers. You're all suspended, effective immediately, with pay for now. There will be a full investigation and a disciplinary hearing. You'll have a chance to respond formally to these allegations. But I want to be clear. What happened to me will not be swept under the rug. You will be held accountable. She turned to Walsh specifically. And you, Sergeant. You're supposed to be a leader. You're supposed to set an example. Instead, you enabled and participated in misconduct. That's arguably worse than what your officers did because you knew better. Walsh nodded, his career flashing before his eyes. 15 years gone because of one traffic stop. You're dismissed, Maya said. Turn in your badges and weapons to Lieutenant Anderson on your way out. You'll get them back if you're cleared, but until then, you're on administrative duty. They filed out of the room like condemned prisoners, each of them avoiding her eyes. Maya watched them go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was being served, but sadness that it had come to this at all. Anderson came back in after they'd left. That was intense. It needed to be done, Maya said. Word spread through the department faster than Maya had expected. By lunchtime, everyone knew. The lieutenant commander had been stopped and harassed by officers from her own department. 3 officers were suspended. Internal Affairs was launching a major investigation. The reaction was mixed, and that didn't surprise Maya at all. Some officers were outraged on her behalf. They came to her office to express their support, to tell her they couldn't believe anyone would treat her that way. These were mostly younger officers or people she'd worked closely with over the years. They saw what had happened as a clear violation of everything the badge was supposed to represent. Others were quietly supportive but worried. They didn't come to her office, but they sent private messages or caught her in the hallway. I'm glad you're doing something about this, they'd say in low voices. But be careful. You're making enemies. These were the realists, the ones who understood that challenging misconduct meant challenging the culture that allowed it to exist. Then there were the ones who said nothing at all. They avoided eye contact in the halls. They found reasons to not be in the break room when she was there. Their silence spoke volumes. They either didn't believe racism was a problem in the department, or they thought Maya was overreacting, or they resented her for making waves. The worst were the ones who actively criticized her decision. She didn't hear it directly, but Anderson did, and he reported back. Some of the older guys are saying you're being too harsh. Anderson told her privately. They're calling it a witch hunt, saying you're using your position to settle a personal score. Maya had expected this too, but it still stung. A personal score. As if being racially profiled is just a personal issue. I know, it's ridiculous, but that's the narrative some people are pushing. They're saying Sutton, Cole, and Walsh made an honest mistake, and you're destroying their careers over it. An honest mistake that lasted 40 minutes and involved multiple policy violations, Maya said bitterly. An honest mistake that included turning off body cameras and lying in their official statements. I'm on your side, Anderson assured her. 100%. But I wanted you to know what you're up against. Maya appreciated the warning. She knew fighting this battle would be hard, but she hadn't fully prepared for how personal it would feel. These weren't strangers criticizing her. These were colleagues, people she'd worked with for years. The media got wind of the story, of course. A journalist from the local paper called asking for a statement. Maya declined to comment, citing an ongoing investigation. But that didn't stop the story from running. High-ranking police commander alleges racial profiling by own department, read the headline. The article was surprisingly balanced, presenting the facts without too much editorializing. But the comments section online was a disaster. People who didn't know her, who hadn't seen the video, who had no understanding of what actually happened felt entitled to share their opinions. Some supported her, many didn't. Playing the race card to get attention, one comment read. If she didn't want to be stopped, she shouldn't have been in that neighborhood, said another. This is why we can't recruit good officers anymore. One mistake and their careers are over, complained someone else. Maya forced herself to stop reading after the first few dozen comments. It wasn't good for her mental health, and it wasn't going to change anything. People had already made up their minds based on their own biases and experiences. What hurt more were the reactions from the black community. The local NAACP chapter reached out wanting to meet with her. Community activists asked her to speak at a rally about police reform. People who'd had similar experiences wanted to share their stories with her. Maya wanted to help them all. She wanted to be the champion they needed. But she was also exhausted. Living through the trauma of that traffic stop had been hard enough. Now she had to relive it over and over in meetings and interviews and conversations. And there was another layer to it all. Some people in the Black community questioned why she was a police officer at all. How can you work for a system that treats us like this? Someone asked her at a community meeting she'd agreed to attend. It was a fair question, one Maya had asked herself many times over her career. The answer was complicated. She believed in the idea of policing, in serving and protecting communities. She believed that having people of color in law enforcement could make a difference, could change the culture from within. But experiences like this made her wonder if she was naive, if the system was too broken to fix. Her family had mixed reactions too. Her mother called the day the story hit the news, worried and upset. "Baby, are you okay? Do you need me to come stay with you?" "I'm fine, Mom, really." "Those officers should be ashamed of themselves, treating you like that." My daughter, who has done nothing but serve her community with honor. Her father, a retired postal worker who'd experienced his own share of discrimination over the years, was proud, but cautious. "You did the right thing by reporting it. But watch your back, Maya. The police protect their own. You're going against that, and not everyone is going to like it." Her younger brother was angry. "I can't believe this happened to you. You're a commander and they still treated you like that. What chance do the rest of us have?" That was the question that kept Maya up at night. If she, with all her training and knowledge and rank, could be treated this way, what about regular citizens? What about young Black men who didn't know their rights? What about families who were too scared to file complaints? The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, Sutton, Cole, and Walsh were on paid administrative leave, sitting at home while the investigation continued. Maya knew they were probably meeting with lawyers, preparing their defense, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. Anderson's investigation uncovered more problems. Sutton and Cole had a pattern of stops in certain neighborhoods, targeting people who didn't fit the demographic. Their body cameras were turned off or malfunctioning more often than department average. Several previous complaints had been filed against them, but all had been dismissed after cursory investigations. The department's policies on body cameras were also problematic. Officers had too much discretion about when to turn them on and off. There were no real consequences for failing to record interactions. Maya added policy reform to her growing list of things that needed to change. She also discovered that Walsh had been aware of Sutton and Cole's behavior for months. Other officers had mentioned concerns to him, but he'd brushed them off as rookie nerves or being too politically correct. As their supervisor, he should have been monitoring them more closely, should have been reviewing their stops and body camera footage. Instead, he'd enabled their misconduct through neglect and willful ignorance. The depth of the problem became clearer each day. This wasn't just about 3 bad officers. It was about a system that allowed bad behavior to continue, that protected officers even when they violated policies, that dismissed complaints from citizens who were just trying to be heard. Maya called a meeting with the police chief, Commander Harrison, a week after the suspensions. Harrison was a 25-year veteran who'd risen through the ranks during a different era of policing. He was old school but generally fair, and Maya respected him even when they disagreed. "This situation is creating problems," Harrison said bluntly when they sat down in his office. "The union is upset. Officers are choosing sides. The mayor's office is asking questions. We need to find a resolution." "The resolution is accountability," Maya said firmly. "Those 3 officers violated policy and mistreated a citizen. There needs to be consequences." "I agree," Harrison said, which surprised her a little. "But we also need to think about the bigger picture. How do we use this as a teaching moment without destroying careers and dividing the department?" "Sir, with respect, some careers deserve to be destroyed. If an officer can't treat people with basic dignity and respect, they shouldn't be wearing a badge." Harrison sighed. "You're right. I know you're right. But it's not that simple. If we fire them, they'll appeal. The union will fight. It'll drag on for months, maybe years. And in the meantime, the department looks bad, morale suffers, and nothing really changes." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we offer them a choice. Resign quietly, or face termination and a full public disciplinary process. Most officers will take the resignation. They get to save some face and we get them out of the department. Maya understood the pragmatism of it, but it didn't sit right with her. And what message does that send? That if you get caught doing something wrong, you can just quit and avoid consequences. The consequence is losing their career, Harrison pointed out. For most officers, that's punishment enough. But it doesn't create a record that follows them. They can apply to other departments. They can keep being officers somewhere else, just not here. You want them blacklisted? I want accountability. I want a system where officers who violate people's rights face real consequences, not just get moved around like problem priests. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. You've got fire in you, Richardson. That's good. We need that. But you also need to pick your battles. You can't fight every fight or you'll burn out. The disciplinary hearing took place in a conference room that felt too small for the weight of what was about to happen. Maya sat on one side of the table with Anderson and Chief Harrison. Across from them were Officers Sutton and Cole, their union representatives and their lawyers. Sergeant Walsh had a separate hearing scheduled for the next day. The video played on a large screen at the front of the room. 40 minutes condensed into undeniable evidence. There was no way to spin it, no way to explain it away. Every inappropriate question, every dismissive comment, every moment of disrespect was captured clearly. Sutton's lawyer tried anyway. My client made some errors in judgment, certainly. But there was no malicious intent. This was a routine traffic stop that perhaps went on longer than necessary. But Officer Sutton was simply being thorough. Thorough, Maya repeated, her voice cutting through the lawyer's excuses. Is that what you call questioning whether I could afford my own home? Asking repeatedly about my employment as if I couldn't possibly have a legitimate job? Making assumptions about who belongs in certain neighborhoods? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My client maintains that he was following his training regarding suspicious activity in high-crime areas. Anderson jumped in. That neighborhood has one of the lowest crime rates in the city. There was no basis for suspicion. Commander Richardson wasn't speeding, wasn't driving erratically, and as the video clearly shows, had no broken taillight. The stop itself was pretextual. Cole's lawyer spoke up. Officers have discretion in making traffic stops. They don't need to justify every decision to. They absolutely need to justify their decisions when those decisions violate someone's constitutional rights, Maya interrupted. And let's talk about the body cameras. Both officers turned them off during most of the stop. That's a direct violation of department policy. Why? Sutton finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We forgot to turn them on. You forgot, Maya said flatly. For 40 minutes. And then you suddenly remembered right at the end, when you were letting me go. How convenient. The union representative, a gruff older officer named Patterson, cleared his throat. Commander Richardson, nobody is denying that mistakes were made. But these are good officers with clean records. One incident shouldn't define their entire careers. Maya had been waiting for this argument. Let's talk about those clean records. Anderson, pull up the complaint history. Anderson brought up a file on his laptop, projecting it onto the screen. Officer Sutton has had 6 complaints filed against him in the past 3 years. 4 were marked as unfounded. 2 were marked as unprovable due to lack of evidence. Officer Cole has 8 complaints in the same time period with similar outcomes. Complaints don't mean guilt, Patterson argued. People file complaints all the time. It doesn't mean the officers did anything wrong. True, Maya acknowledged. But here's what's interesting. When we dug deeper into those complaints, we found patterns. Most of them involved traffic stops in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. Most of them mentioned officers asking inappropriate questions about employment, residence, or vehicle ownership. Several mentioned body cameras being turned off or malfunctioning. Does that sound familiar? The room went quiet. The lawyers exchanged glances. Even the union representative looked uncomfortable. We also pulled the data on their stops over the past year. Anderson continued. Officer Sutton stopped Black drivers at a rate 3 times higher than their percentage of the population in his patrol area. Officer Cole's rate was even higher, and when we looked at the outcomes, Black drivers were significantly more likely to be searched, even though they were less likely to be found with contraband. This is a witch hunt, Sutton's lawyer protested. You're cherry-picking data to support a narrative. The data speaks for itself, Maya said coldly. These officers have been engaging in racial profiling for years. The only difference this time is that they profiled someone who had the power to do something about it. Chief Harrison, who'd been mostly quiet during the hearing, finally spoke. I've reviewed all the evidence. I've read the reports. I've watched the video multiple times. And I've come to a conclusion. Officers Sutton and Cole, you're being terminated, effective immediately. The room erupted. The lawyers started talking over each other. Patterson protested loudly about procedures and appeals. The two officers looked devastated. Harrison held up his hand for silence. You'll have the right to appeal this decision through the proper channels. But based on the evidence presented, I have no confidence in your ability to serve this community fairly and professionally. You turned off your body cameras. You lied in your official statements. You engaged in a pattern of discriminatory stops. And when given the chance to take responsibility, you've made excuses and denied wrongdoing. What about Commander Richardson's role in this? Cole's lawyer asked desperately. She filed a complaint without identifying herself. She let the investigation proceed under false pretenses. Isn't that entrapment? Maya couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. Entrapment? I'm the victim here, not the perpetrator. I had every right to file a complaint as a private citizen. The fact that I'm also a police officer doesn't change what you did to me. You were testing them, the lawyer insisted. You wanted them to fail. No, Maya said firmly. I wanted to see if the system worked. I wanted to see if a regular complaint from a regular citizen would be taken seriously. And you know what? Before I revealed who I was, your clients were confident nothing would happen to them. They told me complaints go nowhere. They laughed about it. That's the real problem here. The hearing went on for another hour, with lawyers arguing about procedures and protocols, unions threatening appeals, and everyone generally making things as complicated as possible. But the outcome was clear. Sutton and Cole were done. Their careers in law enforcement were over. Sergeant Walsh's hearing the next day went similarly, though his situation was somehow worse. As a supervisor, he'd had a responsibility to correct his officers' behavior. Instead, he'd participated in it. He'd enabled a culture of discrimination through his own actions and inactions. I've reviewed your history, Walsh, Chief Harrison said during that hearing. You've been a sergeant for 7 years. In that time, multiple officers under your supervision have had complaints filed against them for similar issues. And every single time you've defended them, you've minimized concerns. You've discouraged other officers from reporting problems. Walsh looked older than he had just weeks ago. The stress of the investigation had worn on him. I was trying to protect my team. Your team was violating people's rights, Maya said, and you were too busy protecting them to care about the people they were hurting. Walsh's termination was announced that same day. All 3 officers were out. The union immediately filed appeals on their behalf, which meant the legal battles were just beginning. But for now, at least, they were no longer wearing badges. The announcement sent shockwaves through the department and the community. Local news covered it extensively. Community groups held press conferences praising the decision. The police union held their own press conference condemning it. Maya found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't wanted but couldn't avoid. She gave one carefully worded statement to the press, talking about accountability and reform without getting into specifics about the case. But behind closed doors, she was working on something bigger. The terminations were just the beginning. Maya knew that firing 3 officers wouldn't solve the systemic problems that had allowed their behavior to flourish. Real change required changing the culture, the policies, the training, and the accountability measures. She put together a comprehensive reform proposal. Mandatory bias training for all officers, not just a one-time seminar but ongoing education. Stricter body camera policies with real consequences for violations. An early warning system to identify officers with patterns of complaints before they became major problems. Community oversight with actual power to review cases and recommend discipline. Chief Harrison supported most of her proposals, though he pushed back on some of the more radical changes. The police union fought against nearly all of it. City council was divided, with some members calling for even more reforms and others worried about going too far. Through it all, Maya kept thinking about that night on the side of the road, standing there with her phone camera recording, being treated like a criminal in her own city by officers from her own department. She thought about all the people who'd experienced the same thing without any recourse, without anyone believing them, without any justice. That's what kept her going through the difficult meetings, The hostile reactions, the exhausting debates. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who'd been dismissed, doubted, and disrespected. She was fighting for a system that actually lived up to its ideals instead of just talking about them. The battle was far from over. Appeals would drag on. Reforms would be watered down and fought over. Some people would never forgive her for betraying fellow officers. But at least now there was momentum for change. At least now people were paying attention. 6 months after that traffic stop, Maya stood at a podium in front of the city council chambers preparing to testify at a public hearing on police reform. The room was packed. Community members filled every seat with more standing along the walls. Local media had their cameras set up. This was the moment that would determine whether real change would happen, or if everything she'd fought for would be diluted into meaningless gestures. The journey to this point had been brutal. The appeals process for the 3 terminated officers was still grinding through the system. The union had filed grievances and lawsuits. Some officers in the department had made her life difficult in subtle ways, excluding her from informal meetings, spreading rumors, questioning her loyalty to the badge. But there had been victories too. The body camera policy had been strengthened. Officers now faced automatic suspension for turning off cameras during citizen interactions. An independent review board had been established, made up of community members with actual power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. The early warning system Maya had proposed was being implemented, tracking patterns of complaints and use of force to identify problematic officers before situations escalated. Most importantly, the conversation had changed. People were talking about racial profiling openly now. Officers were being trained to recognize their own biases. Citizens felt more empowered to file complaints, knowing they might actually be taken seriously. Maya had also become something she never intended to be, a symbol. Her story had resonated beyond just her city. She'd been invited to speak at conferences about police reform. Other departments wanted to know how she'd navigated the situation. Young black women in law enforcement reached out to her, sharing their own stories and looking for guidance. It was exhausting and meaningful in equal measure. Now, standing at this podium, Maya took a deep breath and began her testimony. 6 months ago, I was pulled over while driving home from the gym. I was in civilian clothes, not wearing my badge or uniform. 2 officers approached my vehicle and proceeded to detain me for 40 minutes. They questioned my right to own my car. They made assumptions about my employment. They implied that I didn't belong in the neighborhood where I live. They turned off their body cameras to hide what they were doing. And when I tried to file a complaint, they laughed and told me it would go nowhere. The room was completely silent. Everyone knew this story, but hearing her tell it in her own words still had power. The only reason those officers faced consequences is because I had the knowledge, the resources, and the rank to fight back. But I think about all the people who've experienced similar treatment without any of those advantages. I think about the young black man who gets stopped on his way to work and has no idea what his rights are. I think about the Latino family that gets pulled over and questioned about their immigration status even though they're all citizens. I think about the countless people who filed complaints that were dismissed without real investigation. Maya paused, looking around the room. She saw community leaders who'd been fighting this battle for years. She saw young activists who were just getting started. She saw families who'd lost loved ones to police violence. She saw her own family sitting in the front row, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. What happened to me was wrong, but it wasn't unique. It's a symptom of a larger problem. A culture that allows some officers to see certain people as suspects first and citizens second. We can't fix that by firing a few officers. We have to change the entire system. She went on to detail the reforms that had been implemented and the ones still being debated. She talked about the importance of community oversight, of transparent investigation processes, of holding officers accountable regardless of their rank or relationships. She acknowledged the difficulty of the work and the resistance she'd faced. Some people have said I betrayed my fellow officers by speaking out. They say I should have handled this quietly within the department without making it public. But silence is what allowed this problem to exist in the first place. Silence is what protected bad officers at the expense of good ones. Silence is what told citizens their complaints didn't matter. Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke. I didn't become a police officer to be silent. I became an officer to serve my community. to protect people's rights, to uphold justice. And that means holding my own department accountable when it fails to live up to those ideals. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't everyone, she noticed. Some people sat with their arms crossed, unmoved. But the overwhelming response was supportive, grateful even. The next several speakers were community members who shared their own stories of being stopped, harassed, or mistreated by police. Some were recent incidents. Others were from years ago. Stories people had never told because they didn't think anyone would listen. Maya listened to everyone, taking notes, her heart breaking at the sheer volume of pain and mistrust. Then came the opposition. Union representatives spoke about the challenges officers faced, the split-second decisions they had to make, the dangers of the job. They argued that the reforms went too far, that they would make officers second-guess themselves in critical situations. Maya understood their concerns, but she also knew they were missing the point. Nobody was saying policing was easy. Nobody was denying that officers faced real dangers. But that didn't excuse discrimination. It didn't justify violating people's rights. The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, the city council voted to adopt most of Maya's proposed reforms, though some were modified to address the union's concerns. It wasn't everything she'd hoped for, but it was progress. Real, meaningful progress. As people filed out of the chambers, Maya found herself surrounded by community members wanting to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her their stories. It was overwhelming, but she tried to give each person her full attention. These were the people she was fighting for. These were the voices that mattered. An elderly black woman approached her, moving slowly with a cane. "Thank you," she said simply. "My grandson was stopped last year. They searched his car, threw all his things on the ground, treated him like a criminal. He's a college student. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but he was too scared to complain. He said nobody would believe him anyway." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "Tell him to file a complaint now. Tell him things are changing. Tell him his voice matters." The woman nodded, squeezing Maya's hand. "I will. God bless you, child." Later that evening, Maya sat in her office alone, the building mostly empty except for a few night shift officers. She opened her computer and looked at the complaint system she'd helped redesign. It was more user-friendly now, more transparent. People could track their complaints, see updates, get actual responses instead of being left in the dark. She clicked through to the statistics page. In the 6 months since her incident became public, complaints filed had increased by 40%. At first glance, that seemed bad. But Maya knew it was actually a good sign. It meant people felt safe enough to report problems. It meant they believed something might actually be done. More importantly, the number of sustained complaints had also increased. Instead of 90% being dismissed, now it was closer to 50-50. Officers who violated policy were facing actual consequences. The message was getting through. You can't just do whatever you want out there. Someone is watching. Someone cares. There was a knock on her door. Maya looked up to see Officer Jennifer Park, a young Asian American officer who'd been with the department for 3 years. She looked nervous. "Commander, do you have a minute?" "Of course." "Come in." Park sat down, fidgeting with her hands. "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. The reforms, the training, all of it. It's made a difference." "I'm glad to hear that," Maya said. "But I sense there's more you want to say." Park nodded. "I was there that night. Not at your stop, but I heard the radio traffic. I heard Sutton and Cole talking about pulling over a suspicious vehicle. I should have known something was wrong. I should have driven over, checked on the situation. But I didn't, I just let it happen." Maya studied the young officer. She could see the guilt written all over her face. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was scared. I'm still new, and they were senior officers. I didn't want to be seen as someone who doesn't back up her fellow cops. I didn't want to make waves, and I'm ashamed of that now." "Have you ever been in a situation where you felt pressured to go along with something you knew was wrong?" Maya asked. Park looked down. "A few times. Nothing as serious as what happened to you, but yes, little things. Being tougher than necessary during a stop, looking the other way when another officer was rude to someone, not speaking up when I heard inappropriate comments. And has that changed?" "It has. After everything that happened, after seeing you stand up for what's right even when it was hard, it made me realize I need to do better." "We all do." Last week, I actually spoke up when my partner was getting too aggressive during a traffic stop. I suggested we de-escalate. He wasn't happy about it, but he listened. Maya smiled. That takes courage. More courage than most people realize. It's easy to be brave when you're in charge. It's much harder when you're the junior person trying to challenge someone with more experience.